Good evening. Can you hear me? Kind of? Can we get a little more volume in the back? Thank you. Well, welcome to all of you. And I'm curious, who's here for the first time? Wow. It's like 7, 8. Well, welcome. And I was just, before coming down here, having this flashback to walking through the Fenway in Boston, where I lived for 13 years, and listening to Upaya Dharma talks before I had ever been here. And it was a difficult time for me. And it felt like a kind of lifeline. And I didn't know why. One of the talks was John Donne, and I had no idea what he was talking about. But there was something about it, this place and the teachings, that really nourished me and gave me some energy during a difficult time. And so it's really wild to be sitting here now, giving a talk. And, my wish is that maybe one person hears this talk and maybe feels a little bit of an uplift, as I did all those years ago. I want to wave to Roshi, who's online and in Arizona teaching. And thank you, Roshi, for the opportunity to sit up here. And my mom, who's likely watching online, though her puppy had surgery today, so she might be tending to the puppy. But my mom and my family, who have allowed me to be here with so much ease. And those of us who are in residency for long enough know that that's not always the case with our families. There's not always that kind of support. And so it feels so incredible to be the recipient of that. Monshin, Kodo, Seigen, Fushin, Dainen, Kozan, Shinzan, Wendy J, who I think is also online, Sensei Kathy Fisher, all of the amazing teachers who have come through here. I feel like each of them have shaped and pushed and pulled me in some way. And can I have a clock? Because we might just be doing thank yous. And last, but of course not least, the residents, Current, for making the very odd choice to come live in this context. And past, Sarah, Koshin, maybe some others. So thank you all for being here. And last week, Kodo extended this challenge. It's my first talk, and so traditionally I would give a way-seeking mind talk, which is what brought me here. But we've also been studying the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 lines. And so his challenge was, well, perhaps I could do both the way-seeking mind talk and the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 lines. This is a little bit of a feel of the dynamic between Kodo and me. It's, we push and pull on each other in a beautiful way. I'm going to try, but I don't know what's going to happen. We may just stick with way-seeking mind, but I have prepared something about the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 8,000 lines. What brought me to practice? I want to go back about, gosh, almost 12 years now. April 20th, 2013. I'm not sure Jiryu was born yet, but maybe.
Just barely.
Okay, yeah. Um, it was It was a Saturday morning, and it had been a very weird week in Boston. That Monday had been Marathon Monday. Anyone here spent any time in Boston? Yeah. Oh, geez, Louise, this is great. Um, so, Marathon Monday in Boston, like the whole city shuts down. It's quite a big deal. Um, and it's also Patriots Day, which I think is a holiday that's only celebrated in Boston. But that Monday was the Monday of the bombing at the marathon. And I was just a few blocks away when it happened, heading in that direction to meet friends right along the finish line, which is where the bombing took place. It's two pressure cookers filled with shrapnel that exploded right along the finish line, Main Street in Boston. And it was terrifying. And especially that first day, we didn't know what happened. I do recall listening to the news while lying, hiding in my bathtub. And that's about all I could do at that time. And the city had been shut down almost completely, and some of the surrounding suburbs, as they tried to find the two suspects, one of whom was shot, the other of whom was found on Friday, April 19th, the day before. April 19th, 2013 was also the 33rd wedding anniversary for my parents, and the first since my father's death, which had happened 6 months earlier, and was sudden, but not shocking after a few very difficult years as he was working with heart problems and psychological issues. And my mom and I, my mom who was living with him in Connecticut, me who was in Boston, and my brother who was in London at the time, trying sometimes skillfully, and sometimes not so skillfully, to support him at the end of his life. And I was 29 years old. I woke up on that Saturday morning and I felt kind of funny and very slowly started to lose feeling in my body. Started to feel like my body was out of my control. Picked up my cell phone to try and phone a friend. I lived alone in the South End in a studio, and actually didn't have the motor capacity to hold or dial a phone. And unlocked my door. Luckily, I lived on the first floor and crawled about 100 yards from my door to the doorman, and said, I need to go to the hospital. I went to Boston Medical Center. In the ambulance, had no idea what was happening, but was in a total kind of tailspin. And this wonderful psychiatric nurse, who sadly, I do not recall her name. Honestly, at that moment, I was not so lucid or coherent, popped an Ativan in my mouth, which was great. And came back about 15 minutes later and said, have you ever had a panic attack before? And I said, is that what that was? Because I have no idea what's happening right now. She said it was. And we talked for a while, and we talked about my life, what I was experiencing, and she said, "I'd like to put you on medication." And I said, "I don't want medication." She said, "I really, really think you should be on medication." And we went back and forth like this a few times, and I kept refusing. And she said, "Okay, if you're not going to take medication, promise me when you go home, you'll look up John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction program." And I said, "I don't think I'm stressed." And she said, "You just had a panic attack. You're stressed. Go home, meditate, and figure it out." And she was so warm and tough as nails. Just this incredible being and presence at my bedside that day. And so I did that. And that was the spring of 2013. I was a long distance swimmer. I swam from when I was 6 and through 21, all through college. And for 8 of those years was in the pool 9 or 10 times a week. So there's a kind of strain of well, crazy is one way to talk about it, but just this kind of drive when something kind of gets into my bones. And so I started a daily practice. And for those years at home, I sat just about every day. And it was an incredible time, and it was a difficult time. I'm also a recovering alcoholic. And at that time, I was drinking a lot. And the only time that I didn't sit was honestly when I was too hungover to get out of bed. And that abuse, that pattern of abuse really escalated in the days and weeks and months after my father's death. I didn't know where to put it. I didn't know how to be with it. And in particular, I didn't know how to be both with the incredible sadness of his passing and also the incredible relief that he had died. The incredible relief that his suffering and the suffering of our family related to him was over. And I did not know what to do with that at that time, but it turned itself inward, in not the cool way, but in the toxic way. And so this funny thing happened in my life during those years, 2013 to 2018. I established a sitting practice. I was dedicated to a sitting practice, and at the same time, my alcoholism just got worse. The pattern just got worse for those 5 years. And I had periods of sobriety during that time and periods of feeling like I never need to drink again and I will never drink again. And then periods where the circumstances of my life led me to feel like I had no other choice other than to turn to a bottle. To sit through that is a kind of amazing thing for me. Kind of 5 years of facing my own destructiveness, the harm I was causing myself and others. It wasn't pleasant sitting. It wasn't happy sitting. I didn't get up off the cushion and feel joyful by any means. But there was something that was happening during that time where there was a little bit more space coming into my life. There was a little bit more capacity to hold what was going on in my life. And Roshi sometimes says that Zazen's not a cure-all. And Zazen didn't get me sober. It didn't fix that. It gave me a perspective. It gave me a way to be with my life that was honest, or at least more honest with what I was sitting with. That was a little bit more grounded. I was also working as a consultant at this time and working 50, 60, 70-hour weeks, flying all over the country to meet with all sorts of people, and exhausted, chronically exhausted, and counterintuitively doing really well at work. Really moving up. And gosh, what a cocktail that was. No pun intended. I came for my first session in 2018. It was the first vacation I had really taken in many years. And all my friends, when I told them that this is how I was planning to spend the first vacation in quite a few years, were just dumbfounded. At this point, I was avowedly anti-spiritual. And this was just wild to them that I would make a choice to come to a Zen center. At that point, I was sitting on my own. I was reading Dharma books in disguise. I loved my Kindle because nobody could see the cover, but I was mortified. Truly, I was embarrassed to be reading a Dharma book in public. This was my life at that time. I remember sitting in this beautiful hotel in Chicago called the Chicago Athletic Club, overlooking Millennium Park. And I had Sharon Salzberg's Loving Kindness book. And I didn't have my Kindle, and I really wanted to read it. It was like the thing that was keeping me alive at that time. But sitting there with a cocktail and being like, I can't let anybody see the cover of this book. I really felt like I will be thrown out of this place. And so I came here not having been to Upaya before and not knowing anyone here. A friend of mine had just been for a retreat, and someone I really loved and trusted and said, you should go. And at that point, I was getting pretty desperate, quite honestly. And so I did. I'd never even been to the Southwest before. I was born and raised in the Northeast. And I sat sesshin, and two things happened. One was that I felt home for the first time in my adult life. And I was somewhere that wasn't home in any way. I had no relation here. And honestly felt pretty uncomfortable for most of the week. I had a roommate who wasn't very good at noble silence, which those of you who live with me here now know really agitated me. But I felt at home, and I didn't know what that was. And I also felt like I never needed to drink again. Like I could actually live weirdly coming out of this very long schedule, very long days, like so deeply fulfilled. Like I didn't need to add a thing to my life, to my day. And I left here. I was staying in an Albuquerque hotel, airport hotel, and went to get dinner and got drunk. And the next month and a half I was a binge drinker. That was my pattern. The worst of my binge drinking. I started drinking when I was 14. So at this point, I was 35. So of those 21 years, it was the worst I had experienced. And Roshi says, in moments of change, the ego can fight back. And I look back and think my ego was fighting for its life. This wasn't just a chemical thing. This is who I was. This was my identity. This was my life. I worked in the arts. Anyone who's worked in the arts knows there's a good amount of drinking. You go to the opera and then the after party and then the after party. And that's where the business happens, actually. That's where you sell work. I was a consultant. That's where I bonded with my bosses and the people who worked for me. So this was a threat to my very way of being, to even consider sobriety. I was a swimmer. I came by my drinking habit, honestly, through swimming. That's all I did with my friends. That's all we did in college. That's all we did after college. We went out for drinks. This was my connection to the world, to my world. And so the evening of December 18th, actually the evening of December 19th, it was 2:00 in the morning on December 18th, right before Christmas. I was on the tail end of a 6-day straight binge. And I called my mom and for the first time said, I need your help. I can't do this anymore. And she said, she's in Connecticut. She picked up. She said, I'll drive up there right now on one condition. This is my memory, by the way, my intoxicated memory. On one condition. You actually let me help you. You listen to me. And if you're not ready to do that, that's okay. But then I'm not going to drive up there right now. And I said, okay. And so she drove to Boston. She got there around 5, 6 in the morning. I, of course, kept drinking until her arrival because it's all I could muster at that time was some sense that this was the end of something. We went to MGH, and the next day I went to rehab. And in Bearing Witness, Roshi Berni talks about plunge experiences, the Bearing Witness retreats at Auschwitz and street retreats, and he writes, it leaves, or they leave people's minds blank. Their usual concepts and ideas fail them. They don't know what to think. They have lost control. They're in a space of not knowing or unknowing. And that was my experience in rehab. I was strip searched on my way in. My admittance was at 1:00 in the morning, and found myself voluntarily, but on a locked ward. And I signed away my rights to leave. And this wasn't a fancy rehab. And for the first day, all I could muster was how different I was than everybody else there. How I was still had a job, still had a family, that my substance of choice was alcohol and not heroin. All I could see, the only way I could survive that first 24 hours was to create a sense of, I am not like these other people. I am okay because I'm not that bad. And that rehab program was basically 8 hours a day of group therapy, and just sat in a room for 45 minutes to an hour at a time. And there was a topic not so different than our council practice here. And you spoke into the center of the circle. And that's all we did. And on the second day, a young man who was about my age, I was 35, this was 2018, who was unsheltered, heroin addict, who shared that he lived on the street not so many blocks from my apartment. We were sharing our addiction stories. And he shared his addiction story. And my whole world fell apart as I listened to this young man share my addiction story. And everything that I had been holding up as my difference from all of these people, the thing that was, seemingly keeping me alive at that point, fell to pieces in that moment. And thank goodness. I spent a few more days there, and once we've dropped all of our resistances, it was kind of fun. Um, Fascinating people, fascinating stories. All you can eat ice cream. They have a lot of sugar in rehab, because no caffeine, no nicotine, so they give you sugar, or at least in this one they did. Those of you who know me know I love ice cream. Yeah, it was a beautiful thing and a deeply terrible and painful thing. And it opened up my sitting practice in a different way, a way I didn't understand. This is my, telling the story after living at Upaya for almost 4 years and being a priest and having language. None of this felt like what I just told in the moment. It was just trying to figure out what was next. How I could survive, actually. How I could thrive in a way, not just get by day to day. And I'll wrap up this portion though, that's for me the perfection of wisdom in 8,000 lines, that falling to pieces. The next couple of years were a time of integration, of getting sober, of reorienting my life. I came to Upaya a second time in January 2020 for a winter practice period session. And when I left, that's when I thought I'll be here as a resident one day. I thought it would be a lot further off in January 2020. I had a whole bunch going at work, and a major project I had just sold. It's going to take me kind of 5 years ahead. And then the pandemic happened, and that major project fell through. And I was actually stationary for the first time in 10 years. I went more than 2 weeks without traveling, and actually slept in my apartment and got some rest, and followed a completely illogical, irrational, no explanation there or required sense that this is where I should come next. And all of my dear friends who care for me so much said, "You are insane. You're 36 years old. You're the vice president of a firm. You have 37 years old. You're comfortable. It's very materially comfortable. friends and family here. That makes no sense. There's no reason to do that. You can figure it out here. And I followed something. And it wasn't to be a priest, at least not in the top of my mind. And it wasn't because I thought Dharma practice or Zen would have all the answers. I honestly hadn't practiced with a Sangha other than those two sessions. I didn't even know what to expect at that time. But I arrived here on May 1st, 2021. And I've been here since then. And the last thing I'll say about this is one of the first things I said to Roshi when I met her up at the refuge. At that point, we were still mid-pandemic, and you had to quarantine for 7 days alone, which is a hard entry coming into a new place. And so I spent 7 days in Metakaruna all alone, and then the day I was released at 6 a.m., all of the residents, and there were like 10 or 11 then, were going up to Prajna, up to the mountain refuge that day. And I walked out into this flurry of activity. I was the first new resident in 6 months. This is a group of people who were really close and had really been through some things together. And completely overwhelmed, but got in the truck. I don't remember if it was that time or another time where we stopped for coffee, and it was just like a field day, because residents really didn't leave campus at that time because of the pandemic. It was just like a scatter. Kodo ended up in REI because we needed a cooler, but we didn't. I'm not sure what was going on. And yeah, I met Roshi up at the refuge, and she said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "To get out of my own way." That was kind of the best I could say at that moment. And also, I read the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 8,000 lines, and I get that same message. Get out of the way. Everything you need is right here. And so in writing this talk, I have a kind of new perspective. I went on to say a lot more, by the way, and I watched Roshi's eyes roll into the back of her head, and she was very kind and patient. Maybe now I would just leave it at that. So there's only about 5 minutes left. I won't go into the Prajnaparamita Sutra in depth, but I'll say this about it. I was sitting with it, studying it. For me, these sutras, I can't relate to them with so much interest in the kind of academic sense. And I think the history is fascinating, and to take them apart. I was an English major. I did a lot of deconstructionism in college, and just kind of over it now, honestly. And it's a beautiful way to be in relationship with a text. No knock on it. It's just not how these texts live for me. The way they live for me is to live with them, to live alongside them, to see what opens up as I sit with them, what they open up for me. In the beginning of my time, Kozan asked me to read the Diamond Sutra, which is just a condensation of this sutra that we're reading. And I read it twice, and I was furious. And I went back to practice interview with him and kind of yelled at him. I was like, this makes no sense. This is crazy. There's no logic in this. How could you ask me to read this? I was really irrationally mad. And he said, well, okay, read it again. So I read it 5 more times. I read it 5 more times, determined that I would figure something out. And I was left completely frustrated, completely irritated. And a couple months went by, and then all of a sudden it opened for me. It opened in a moment where I was the head of the kitchen and it was practice period, and I was filled with anger and resentment because I was working harder. It's my story. I was working harder than anybody else, and people were not behaving the way I wanted them to. They weren't quiet in the kitchen. They kept putting logs on the fire when it was way too hot in there as I was trying to cook. I was Oscar the Grouch. And the line from the Diamond Sutra, when bodhisattvas give a gift, they don't attach to anything at all, popped into my head. And I thought, I am so deeply attached right now to how this gift is received, to how these people I live with behave, based on what I think is right. And so what comes to me through the Prajnaparamita, by the way, that line is in chapter 31, that line I just referenced, is in chapter 31 of this sutra. When they, bodhisattvas, have given a gift, they do not make it into a basis or support, and they never expect any reward from it. So that is this text. What I've been left with from this is this question, which is, how do we want to live our lives? This sense that our lives are fluid, that they're unfixed, that they're unfixable, that everything is so deeply tied together beyond our comprehension. And we have a choice. Are we going to fight with that tooth and nail? As I still do at times. My partner Sarah is smiling at me. As I was doing all those years, it has to be like this. This is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. I need to control my circumstances. I need these residents to behave exactly the way I want them to behave because I'm working so hard, or my partner, or my children, or my friends. We're going to live in a state of continuous opposition, here, there, right, wrong. Whether that's internal, external, or all external. Or can we willingly, cheerfully, maybe mostly gracefully and sometimes not, release into the truth of this world, which is just this unremitting, unpredictable flow. And so I'll leave us in this moment. I'm already 1 minute over, which I think is pretty good for me, with this question for all of us. For the days that we have left, we don't know how many they are, any of us. How do we want to live? I think we get to choose at least which way we're pointing. Is that a life of freedom from all those strings we attach to ourselves and others? Or are we going to keep fighting with the way things are? I know which way I'm inclined, and I know that I am totally imperfect in walking that path. But I am committed to, and I invite all of those who would like to join me in that. So thank you all so much for being such warm and kind recipients of this talk. It's really kind of amazing to be sitting up here. You're just all glowing, kind of, I think. That's what I'm experiencing. That's what I want to believe. You're all glowing in my direction. I thank you so much.